Hey, welcome back to Women's Wellness Radio and now also on YouTube. And you can find these links at bridgetdanner.com. So, first of all, a big welcome to our guest today, Izabella Wentz. Hi, Izabella.
Hi, Bridget. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Let me tell everybody a little bit about you. So, you're a trained pharmacist, and you are also a Hashimoto's patient, I guess we can say, in remission, discovered at age 27. And in your own research and your own self healing, you have written this wonderful book. I will show it for people on the video. Hashimoto's Thyroiditis Lifestyle Interventions for Finding and Treating the Root Cause. So you became a New York bestseller, which is amazing just from the sheer reception of it, which is totally awesome. You've created quite a community of people with Hashimoto's and just curious about Hashimoto's. And it's really great. First of all, congratulations.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah. So I want to go back a little bit. I enjoyed hearing your personal story in the book. So you said you were diagnosed with Hashimoto's at age 27 when you were, just kind of hitting stride in your career and you were newly married. Um, First of all, you had some symptoms like a lot of young, busy women do, some fatigue and this and that. But were you pretty shocked to find out that you had an autoimmune disease?
Yeah, it was such a big shock for me because I thought I was doing everything right. So I had gone to pharmacy school and I was doing everything that you were supposed to be doing. So I was eating whole grains, low-fat dairy, I was exercising, I wasn't smoking, I wasn't really drinking. And here I thought I was this trying my best to lead a healthy lifestyle, but yet I had all of these symptoms. So I had horrible brain fog, I had fatigue that kept me sleeping for, 12 to 14 hours each night. And then I started losing my hair and I started having joint pains in both of my arms. I got diagnosed with bilateral carpal tunnel syndrome. And it was kind of like one thing after another that kept happening. And I was like, what is going on with my body? You know, I was 25 when I first started having a lot of these symptoms getting worse and worse. And I thought, I'm too young for this. And I would go to the doctor and they'd tell me that I was just getting older, that people get more tired, they get more forgetful as they get older. And eventually, I just kept kind of pursuing things because I knew that something just was not right within my own body. And I ended up getting diagnosed with Hashimoto's. And for me, it was kind of a big shock because when we learned about thyroid disease in pharmacy school, we kind of had a picture, and you might have had this too in your studies, where you have a picture of a woman cut in half, and then the one half is like underactive thyroid and the other half is overactive thyroid. And so the overactive thyroid is a person who was thin and anxious and nervous, had palpitations. And the underactive thyroid woman, was very slow, sluggish, and she was putting on weight and she was fatigued. And I kind of, was surprised because I had a mixture of both those things. So I was fatigued, but I was also losing weight and having palpitations and I was feeling anxious. So it was really a big confusing time in my life trying to figure out what was happening in my body. Part of me was relieved to know that I finally had a diagnosis, that it wasn't just, all in my head for the past 10 years. But another part of me was heartbroken because I thought, I was like really trying my best to be a healthy person. I thought I was doing all the right things. And it was a heartbreak to hear that I had an autoimmune disease that my own body was attacking itself.
Yeah, I bet. And I'm curious, did they test thyroid antibodies because of some of your symptoms, or did they just happen to, luckily for you, just kind of include those in the panel?
They didn't include them in the panel, so it was actually kind of a long journey because I was first diagnosed with I was told that my thyroid was potentially underactive, and it was then they tested it again, and they told me that it was normal, so not to worry about it, don't ever think about it again. Then I went to a different doctor who diagnosed me with antibodies, but said I didn't have to worry about anything. And then it wasn't until the following year that I saw my physician again for a physical where my TSH was actually out of range to the point where, I needed to be on thyroid medication. And I had shown him the previous labs and he said, oh, well, this goes with your history of Hashimoto's. And, nobody really told me that having Hashimoto's was a big deal. So I had these antibodies, they were in the 2000 range, which is very, very high, very aggressive attack on the thyroid gland. A average person without thyroid disease should have those numbers below 35, according to most standard lab tests. So I basically was walking around with this huge autoimmune attack on my thyroid gland, and my doctors didn't really think anything of it for over a year until they finally said, okay, well, now let's put you on medications, which of course, isn't the full answer and isn't always the right answer for people with Hashimoto's.
Okay, so I think maybe before we get into your journey of figuring all this out, let's for people who are listening and aren't really familiar with some of these terms, since you just say what's an autoimmune disease, what's Hashimoto's, and maybe if you could mention what's TSH and TPO, because I'm sure we're gonna hit on both of those a little more.
So absolutely. So an autoimmune condition is basically when our own bodies start to recognize a part of our own immune systems start to recognize a part of our own bodies as an enemy or a foreign invader, much like they would a virus or a bacteria or some other kind of infection. In the case of Hashimoto's, what happens is the immune system starts to recognize the thyroid gland as a foreign invader and launches an immune system attack against the thyroid gland, leading to destruction of the gland, which eventually results in a person having an underactive thyroid. Many people will be told that they have a sluggish underactive thyroid, but they won't be told that it's Hashimoto's, where Hashimoto's accounts for anywhere from 90 to 97% of cases of an underactive thyroid in the United States. So your thyroid is actually not sluggish, it's working over time, but it also happens to be under attack. The TSH is the typical screening test used for thyroid disease. And this test is excellent for cases of advanced thyroid disease. But if you have Hashimoto's in the early stages, probably for the first 10 years, the TSH test is going to be normal. Mm-hmm. So you might have a TSH that comes out normal, and you might be suffering with a lot of the symptoms of Hashimoto's for decades in some cases. I know for me, it was at least a decade before I was diagnosed that I had a lot of the symptoms. So that's one of the screening tests. The thing that I would recommend is if somebody has had their thyroid tested, has suspected that they had thyroid disease, always get a copy of your lab tests. And the TSH number should be somewhere right around 1 for a healthy person without thyroid dysfunction, where most doctors might misread it because of the old lab values, and they'll say that something like a 4 or 5 is normal, where, when they first did the lab values back in the day, they actually had a whole bunch of people's blood in there who had thyroid disease. So the reference ranges were very, very lax. And then the third thing that we talked about are thyroid antibodies. The most common thyroid antibody is known as thyroid peroxidase antibody, or TPO antibody. And then the other antibody is thyroglobulin antibody, TG antibody, that's present in Hashimoto's. And about 90 to 80% of people will have those antibodies respectively when they have Hashimoto's. So this is actually the best screening test for Hashimoto's, because if you get your thyroid antibody tests done, you can uncover that you have Hashimoto's for maybe a decade before you have a change in your thyroid function and before you actually need to go on medications. So getting those antibodies and showing that they're elevated puts you at a really, really great time to be able to reverse and prevent any future damage to your thyroid gland, because you can reduce and eliminate those thyroid antibodies if you follow some of the functional medicine things that you and I teach and we've come to learn.
And that you'll learn about today, yes. So I have a feeling, as people listen, if they haven't been diagnosed, they may be nervous that they have Hashimoto's. And the good part is it's a pretty simple screening, right? There's nothing really that complicated. You can, rule it out. I'm just curious. I'm in a course right now. And we talk a lot about thyroid. Underfunctioning thyroid means secondary to adrenal fatigue. So I'm just curious, when you say 90 to 97% of it is Hashimoto's, where does the secondary part fit in to all that, if that makes sense?
So just to clarify, in the United States, 90 to 97% of the time it'll be Hashimoto's. Worldwide, actually, iodine deficiency is the primary cause. So in countries that don't add iodine to their salt supplies, iodine deficiency causes underactive thyroid hormone, underactive thyroid. because iodine is a component of the thyroid hormone. So a person who's not getting enough iodine will not produce enough thyroid hormone. And a lot of times people will say that old school kind of practitioners might say that everybody who has an underactive thyroid needs to take iodine, which is not always the case, because in some cases with Hashimoto's, having too much iodine can make it worse. So it's very, very important to figure out the root cause of your thyroid condition. So I would say probably 90 to 97% of the cases, it's going to be Hashimoto's. There is a small chance that it might be iodine deficiency. And then the third potential cause, the biggest cause that I'll see, is adrenal issues. So adrenals and thyroid have a very, very intimate relationship where one kind of depends on the other, and they have this awesome hormone communication feedback loop. And so if you're very stressed out, if your adrenals are going to be very underactive, if you have, let's say if you have Addison's disease, or even if you have stage 3 adrenal fatigue, that's going to pull down your thyroid function as well. So we'll see people who don't have Hashimoto's, but who will have a lot of the thyroid symptoms, and even some of their thyroid labs might be off because like the TSH might be, that might be a little bit elevated, or they might have low levels of free thyroid hormones in their blood when their adrenals are impaired. So that is definitely a potential root cause of thyroid issues.
Okay. But if you tested and you don't see the antibodies are in the very low range, then you can more or less rule out Hashimoto's. Or I guess there's also the potential that that you, how can I say, that the antibody levels that day were low, perhaps too. So you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. So antibodies for sure can fluctuate. And the other thing is that some people, 90% of people will have the TPO antibodies, but 10% don't. So some people may not have the antibodies in the blood for whatever reason. So at that point, the next step would be to ask for a thyroid ultrasound, because the thyroid ultrasound can actually uncover Hashimoto's. So it'll show changes consistent with Hashimoto's. There'll be kind of a different texture to the thyroid gland that shows that some cells have started to attack it and infiltrate it. And that's going to be something that can be picked up not always on a blood test, but sometimes on an ultrasound. So if you're having a lot of thyroid symptoms, that's what I would recommend. Be the next step would be the ultrasound.
Okay, thank you for letting me pick your brain a little bit on that. I've been curious about a couple of things there. Okay, so let's go back again. So you found out about your diagnosis and you searched for lifestyle intervention. Asking, you initially said you were having trouble finding information on lifestyle intervention for Hashimoto's. So I'm just curious, what are some of the first things that you found?
So one of the very first things that I found was the connection between gluten and the thyroid. And there was a study done back in Italy, back in maybe a decade ago, that showed that people with celiac disease who also had Hashimoto's and subclinical hypothyroidism, a certain percentage of them were able to reverse their hypothyroidism and get rid of their thyroid antibodies by going on a gluten-free diet. This was very interesting to me, and this is something that I tried and helped me tremendously. Now that I work with clients and I've been surveying some of my readers, I found that about 95% of people actually feel better on a gluten-free diet.
Okay, cool. And then another thing, let's see, actually, let me back up. I would love to read something from your book because I thought it was impressive and entertaining. I'll say that. So you talked about all the things you've tried, researched, or considered in this journey, and those include acupuncture, low-dose naltrexone, fluoride-free toothpaste, kombucha tea, adaptogens, expensive thyroid specialists, compounded thyroid medications, synthroid, armor thyroid, goitrogen avoidance, seaweed snacks, alkalizing the body, medicinal herbs, Dr. Hyman's protocol, Dr. Brownstein's protocol, Dr. Karazian's protocol, Dr. Haskell's protocol, psychic consultation, endocrinologist, chiropractor, selenium supplementation, gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free diet, caveman paleo diet, GAPS SCD diet, body ecology diet, probiotics, iodine consumption and avoidance, coconut virgin oil, a pharmacy's worth of various vitamins and supplements, detoxification, glandulars, protomorphogens, Marshall Protocol, immune balancing, juicing, fermented foods, and treating infections. So pretty impressive list.
I made myself a bit of a little human guinea pig because I was just really interested in getting to the root cause and trying to figure out what was triggering my condition. I kind of am a believer in cause and effect. And I didn't think that this condition just developed out of nowhere. And I had been having all of these symptoms that I thought were very much connected. So I had irritable bowel syndrome that developed probably 10 years prior to that. And then I had this fatigue. And it was kind of like a slippery slope of my health declining. And I ended up having acid reflux. And I just kind of thought, this is all somehow connected. What did I do to bring this on? Is there anything I can do to reverse it? And I just kind of dove into first PubMed research, and then one of the first things I wanted to do was the low-dose naltrexone because, as a pharmacist, drugs were kind of the natural progression for me. And I kind of dove deeper and deeper into trying all the different things and considering different things whenever they made sense to me from, using my clinical and science background. Some of the things were just like, okay, this does not make sense. I've looked at the research and, this could be potentially harmful or not helpful. And then there were other things that I found were actually very, very helpful.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I know you mentioned to me when I met you that you found acupuncture to be pretty helpful for you. You want to talk a bit about that?
I did. So I actually went to acupuncture for about a year and was started on some specific herbs that were, prescribed for me by the acupuncturist. And that was one of the very first interventions that I tried, in addition to the low-dose naltrexone. And I found that my thyroid antibodies actually reduced after acupuncture, and the herbs. And then I felt much better after each session. So I was very anxious at the time, and I would have almost panic attacks and things like that. And I would go to acupuncture once a week, and that seemed to kind of hold me over for the rest of the week. Where I got into some trouble is when I went out of town for a couple of weeks, and I didn't have my acupuncturist around. And at that point, I kind of felt like I lost, I was kind of losing my mind. I was really anxious. I was kind of paranoid. I was very cold all the time. I happened to visit the East Coast in the springtime, and I was living in California at the time, and so I didn't really realize how my cold intolerance played into effect with the thyroid disorder. And at that point, I kind of got a little bit nervous because I thought I needed to dig a little bit deeper because the acupuncture was very much helping with a lot of my symptoms, but I wanted to see if there was anything more that I could do. And at that point is when I was encouraged to actually start changing my diet. Because I was just eating, I was eating all kinds of junk food and going to acupuncture. I was kind of like, you fix me. You know what I mean? And I was saying like, you're the health expert. You fix me. You do all the work and let me just show up.
I totally agree. And I'm an acupuncturist. It's like, it's a procedure and it's a powerful procedure, but if you can't get it every day or sometimes even every week, so you need to do your own work for sure. And in Chinese medicine, we say it's like one of the 5 branches, along with herbs and diet and Qi exercises and all that. So, yeah, I think that's right on. So I'd like to get into another little section of your book. It's a really meaty book. I highly recommend it. So you talk about kind of the steps needed and the time frame needed to go into remission, which I don't even know if some people know that's possible. But if you can talk a little bit about some of the healing needed and the time frames to heal the body and potentially get into remission and how that happens. And then after that, we can get into your dig at it kind of strategy. But if you can maybe give a little aim about where we're going with all this and what's possible, that would be great.
Yeah, so definitely. And Hashimoto's is a pretty complicated condition for many people. And it's usually a combination of food sensitivities, of nutrient depletions, having a poor stress response, which may or may not involve the adrenals, having intestinal permeability or leaky gut, potentially having an impaired ability to detox. And then the other thing is a lot of times people will have chronic kind of hidden infections that can sort of perpetuate the autoimmunity and can even trigger the autoimmunity. So, if your Hashimoto's is only caused by one thing, if you figure out your root cause, for a lot of people it may just be gluten, or for some people it's an H. pylori infection or exposure to like a toxin or to a mold. Things can turn around pretty quickly. So you can actually get yourself into remission within about 3 months. You should see a trend in reducing thyroid antibodies and symptoms within the first month, which is amazing. For other people, though, they might have to kind of dig a little bit deeper. I always recommend starting with the diet first. So starting with, really giving yourself some fabulous nourishing foods, cutting out foods that are commonly sensitizing. So, gluten's kind of the very, very big one. And I think a lot of people have become more aware of the gluten and autoimmune connection nowadays. But also dairy can be a very big trigger for many, many people with thyroid disease. Soy is another big triggering food. And then we go into other potentially triggering foods, which may include eggs, nightshades, nuts, seeds. Kind of depends on the person. So if you are somebody that tried the gluten-free, dairy-free lifestyle for a few months and didn't really get much better after that, or got better but hit a plateau, then you may want to do something like food sensitivity testing or even an elimination diet to see if you have any additional food triggers that could be perpetuating the autoimmunity. So that's where I have people start, is just figuring out your food triggers, and then also eating a very nourishing kind of diet. So making sure that you're eating plenty of great organic vegetables, organic meats. I'm a big proponent of bone broth, which is excellent for, it's very nutrient dense and has excellent gut healing properties. So kind of getting that, your ducks in a row, that would be the first one to really focus on. If you need medications, if you're somebody who has a very high TSH and a very low levels of free thyroid hormones in your body, which can be measured by your doctor on a blood test, I recommend doing medications at that point and making sure that you're on the right medication at the right dose. Because if you don't have medications on board, that can actually worsen the autoimmunity. So because the thyroid gland is working really, really hard, so it's sort of becoming this this organ that can become very inflamed, and the inflammation will kind of get more attention towards it from the rest of the immune system. So actually getting on thyroid medications when you need them, if you have Hashimoto's, can help reduce the autoimmune attack on the thyroid gland and can reduce the antibodies. Then we look at, supporting your adrenals. If your adrenals are very, I would say probably 90% of people with Hashimoto's have some degree of adrenal fatigue. Some of the symptoms of adrenal fatigue would be feeling wired but tired, being kind of anxious, having salt cravings, being sensitive to bright lights, being kind of tired after exercise, having trouble waking up in the morning, or having trouble falling asleep at bedtime. These are all signs and symptoms of adrenal fatigue. There's a lot more. And doing an adrenal saliva test may be helpful. Balancing your blood sugar, making sure you get plenty of rest and sleep are great lifestyle recommendations, as well as B vitamins, vitamin C. And then looking at any nutrient deficiencies that you may have. A lot of people with Hashimoto's will be deficient in iron, and you can measure that as ferritin. They'll be deficient in B12. They'll be deficient in vitamin D, and then sometimes they might be deficient in zinc and selenium as well. So addressing those nutrient depletions is going to be very, very helpful for kind of giving the body and all of your organs enough kind of nutrients to process things. And those are usually the first 3 things I recommend, and people can a lot of times do those on their own or even with conventional doctors. And then some of the other stuff gets a little bit deeper, where you start thinking about looking at if your gut is potentially inflamed and what's causing the gut inflammation, and if you're not getting rid of toxins very well, and whether it's a toxic exposure or whether it's your body that's just not processing things very well.
Okay, so if somebody, say, does already know they have Hashimoto's, and they're just, maybe perhaps they haven't been introduced to this kind of lifestyle intervention as yet, they came to the right place. So first of all, we can get the book, Hashimoto's Thyroiditis, by Izabella Wentz, and then you say start with diet is kind of a good base to start with, and then maybe I can read out your list. You mentioned some of this thing. So you say, don't give up, dig at it, which I think is important. It is complicated, and you say in your book it took you a while to get to the point where you had autoimmune. You had various symptoms that you went unrecognized. I think you said for maybe 10 years. Infections and fatigue and heartburn and all that. So it is important to not give up, and this is your acronym for dig at it. So D stands for depletions and digestion. The I stands for iodine, inflammation, infection, immune balance. G is gut and gluten. And then A stands for adrenals and alkaline phosphatase. And T for triggers. And then intolerances and toxins. And then you kind of go through those chapter by chapter. Would you say you would just recommend like everybody read over the chapters, and if it strikes them like, oh, that kind of sounds like me, or you're describing something familiar, was that a good place to start?
I think that's a really great place to start. And also, going through the book and then also making a health timeline where you think about your whole life starting from the time that you were born. And, were you breastfed as a baby? Were you born prematurely? And then you think about all the different things that you've had in your life that were very stressful, or infections, or times where you maybe got sick and didn't recover very well. So I know a lot of people will say, I lived in this place, it was a basement, and it was something, it kind of smelled like mold in the air, and I just never felt better after that. So for a person like that, we might say, okay, could mold be a potential root cause for you? Could that be a trigger for you? And that would fall under the toxin thing. And then you'll have another person who maybe had never been well most of their life, and it could be gluten sensitivity, and they might remember that as a child they never liked dairy or something like that. Or maybe they had an infection in college and they never quite got better after that. And so you start thinking about, what your own personal health timeline looks like and what could have been contributing to your autoimmunity.
Okay. Yeah, and there's so much good stuff here. I know you mentioned also that they could keep a journal of their healing process, which is something that you did. So you said even just two simple categories, things that make me better and things that make me worse, as you try different lifestyle interventions. So let's see here. Let's talk about a couple. I made note of a couple of my favorites or interesting ones. You mentioned ferritin is something to get checked with a blood test, and you said it can contribute to the hair loss, which I'm sure will perk a lot of people's attentions because none of us want to lose our hair. So can you tell us a little bit about ferritin and how to test it and what it signifies?
So absolutely, and ferritin is basically an iron storage protein that can be tested. So it's more sensitive for iron deficiency than any other test out there. It's something that you often need to ask your doctor to order special for you. And people with Hashimoto's often have low stomach acid, which means that they don't properly extract iron from their foods. Or they might have some gut inflammation that prevents them from absorbing the ferritin or the iron properly. And this has been one of these big things that is often deficient in people with Hashimoto's and can contribute to hair loss. So a person may be on thyroid medications and they may be doing some of these other wonderful things like going gluten-free, but if their ferritin is low, they still might be struggling with brain fog, they might be struggling with fatigue, and they might have hair loss. And hair loss, that's caused by iron deficiency is going to be diffuse. So that means it's going to be kind of like all over your head, not just in one specific patch. The levels, we want to get to, I would say somewhere around 50 for women. That would be kind of the target level for having your ferritin levels. And this is a simple blood test that should be covered on most insurance companies.
Okay, cool. Another marker that I was surprised to see made it into your main list, so to speak, was alkaline phosphatase. And I have referenced it before on labs as being like an indicator of low zinc, but you mentioned it can be an indicator of other nutrient deficiencies too, and it has a pretty important function in the gut. Can you tell us more about that? How to get tested? And I'd love for you to tell me the actual number you find to be, too low or just right.
So the alkaline phosphatase
is an enzyme that's present in just about every mammal, and it can be present in a variety of different, in bone and in muscle tissue as well as in the gut. And the particular alkaline phosphatase in the gut, it has actually been shown to detoxify gut bacteria. So it helps us to actually be more tolerant of ourselves and the creatures that we have living inside of us. One of the potential root causes of autoimmunity has been proposed to be reacting to our own gut bacteria. So having levels of low alkaline phosphatase, which can be due to zinc deficiency, it can be due to other nutrient deficiencies like phosphorus or just being too acidic. And that's something that I would recommend having at least like a 30 or 40 on a lab test.
30 or 40, okay. Yeah, that's really interesting to know. And I'm curious, does the low thyroid cause the low alkaline phosphatase, or is there just a kind of a different relationship there?
It's kind of one of those chicken or egg things because you're not really sure.
Okay.
The low alkaline phosphatase, was it caused by zinc, or do you have too many gram-negative bacteria that are depleting it, or is it something that is caused by thyroid disease? And because thyroid disease prevents the absorption of nutrients from our foods. So it's kind of, they find that more people with thyroid disease actually have low levels of alkaline phosphatase, as well as people with, like autoimmune conditions in general, like rosacea or Crohn's or ulcerative colitis.
Okay.
So it's really something that we always want to address if we find it. Having a more alkaline diet can help. Having enough zinc on board can help, and then making sure you have enough probiotics on board is going to help to kind of normalize that. Some clinicians will actually say that that's one of the tests that they'll run to see if somebody has gut problems. And whenever that number is low, that's a good indication that you might have gut problems.
And you consider 30 or 40 sufficient, or would you prefer to see higher?
You don't want it to be too high because when it's too high, it's going to be associated with increased, potential tissue breakdown and kind of things like that. So you want it, I would say, probably somewhere in the middle of the range. I know some of the ranges will say like under, some of them will not even have a normal range. They'll just say that 0 to whatever is normal. And, 0 to 40, I would say, you're kind of starting to think about that being low.
Okay.
So I would want to have it a little bit over 40 at least. And it doesn't have to be right at that number, but when you get below that, you start thinking like, this might be low. I've seen some people with it as low as 6, as low as 14 or 20. And at that point, we're thinking about that. That's actually a pretty low number.
Wow, okay. So let's talk about a couple more and then we can kind of wrap up. So selenium and iodine. I really got some good insight from your book that helped clarify some things for me on that, because as you well know, there's a lot of debate on iodine and how much to take. And I loved hearing about the selenium and understanding its exact job in the thyroid. And since they're kind of a bit related, could you talk about those two?
So yeah, absolutely. And we kind of talked about, we alluded to this, that basically worldwide iodine deficiency is the primary cause of thyroid disease or having an underactive thyroid. But since iodine was added to the salt supply in like the Western world, the rates of hypothyroidism due to iodine deficiency have greatly diminished, but the rates of Hashimoto's have increased. So iodine has actually been recognized as a trigger for inducing Hashimoto's. And, I like to think of iodine as kind of a Goldilocks hormone or Goldilocks supplement or nutrient, because too much of it is going to be bad and not enough of it is going to be bad. So you want to kind of have a good, you want to have enough of it, but not too much, because too much can cause more inflammation in the thyroid gland, especially if you don't have enough other nutrients on board. One of those nutrients is selenium. Selenium deficiency has been very much recognized as a trigger for Hashimoto's as well. So a lot of times, if you have somebody who's selenium deficient and you give them more iodine, they're more likely to develop Hashimoto's, because selenium plays a very important role in helping to kind of detoxify the process of creating iodine in the body. I like to think of it as, if you were going to a factory and the factory's job was to make cars or something like that, right? And then
the iodine was something that you needed to make the car, but then you didn't have anywhere to throw away the toxic materials that you needed to have for processing of that car, then you wouldn't have, you might have problems with your whole entire plant. And that's kind of how things happen with our bodies, and having too much of one nutrient on board when there's not enough of another nutrient, things don't get processed out correctly, and we can become toxic within our bodies.
Okay. Yeah, and I think you said the selenium with its TPO comes in and to make thyroid hormone, or is used to make thyroid hormone, and there's oxidation, and the selenium cleans it up. And then the more iodine you intake, potentially the more selenium you need. And that kind of takes us back to how much do we need. Yeah, I felt like your book was so helpful at understanding that, because, for a couple of years, I think I was under the impression none of us were getting enough iodine, and none of us eat enough fish, and none of us eat enough seaweed. And even cultures I know a long time ago, like high in the Andes, would go down to the shore to like bring back some fish or seaweed or whatever. So we do need some, but according to you, we don't need a whole heck of a lot, and just the trace amounts we get in potatoes, or if we eat out, or if we have a little fish, is usually going to be enough. I think you did say, I was getting worried reading that chapter. I think you said if you have a healthy functioning thyroid, you don't necessarily have to worry about having a little too much iodine. Is that correct?
You're exactly right. So if a person has the genetic kind of predisposition to develop Hashimoto's, they may be more sensitive to high iodine levels. And this is kind of what the research has shown, is that if you have too much, if you have a person with Hashimoto's or the genes to develop Hashimoto's, you give them too much iodine, that could really get them in trouble. So people with Hashimoto's may only be able to tolerate as much as 400 micrograms of iodine, some people even as low as 200. Definitely the amounts that are like in a prenatal vitamin or in a multivitamin would be fine. But sometimes some advocates will say you need 2 milligrams of iodine, which is basically 1,000 times more than a microgram. And that can be too much for a person. So that can be 5 times the amount that they could tolerate. And that can cause, when I like to think about the thyroid gland and Hashimoto's, it's kind of like you can make a general statement that say that running is really great for everybody, right? So yeah, running is great. Everybody should go running. But if you have a broken leg, you probably don't want to go running, because that would cause you more problems if your leg is broken and in a cast. And same thing with Hashimoto's. If your thyroid gland is inflamed and under attack, you probably don't want to give it more iodine, because that can further the inflammation, because you're going to be making it do more work, because the thyroid gland has to process the iodine. On the other hand, if you're somebody without a family history of Hashimoto's, you're generally pretty healthy and you don't have thyroid disease, you're probably going to be able to tolerate much more iodine than a person with Hashimoto's who actually is going through the autoimmune attack on their thyroid. So part of the whole process of reversing autoimmunity in the thyroid is making the thyroid less visible to the immune system. And when you give somebody iodine, it kind of says, it's kind of like saying, hello, immune system, I'm the thyroid and I'm here, look at me working. And that's kind of the whole, the research has shown that in people who take very high amounts of iodine, this can worsen their Hashimoto's, and then people who lower their amounts of iodine, this can actually make their Hashimoto's better. I don't recommend, iodine restriction long term. I would say it's something that you may want to do if you've had very high levels of iodine. You may want to restrict your levels for a little bit just to kind of cool things down a bit, and then want to make sure that you get all the right nutrients on board. If getting, like I said, the amount in multivitamins or prenatal vitamins is going to be sufficient for most people, and then it's also not going to be harmful for most people with Hashimoto's. It's those super high dosages that I get concerned about, and those can be found in some of the seaweed and things like that. So I'm very cautious with recommending seaweed for people with Hashimoto's, because in some people it can cause a flare-up.
Okay. Okay, I'll ask you one last question. So I thought it was really interesting. You just said about, here I am, immune system drawing notice of thyroid, and then you also talked in the book about the decoy, which I thought was fascinating. Taking a certain supplement, which probably should be advised with your practitioner, to throw the immune system off. Can we just close with that interesting concept?
Sure, and this is kind of neat because there's a old school company called Standard Process that developed this. It's kind of like a thyroid glandular, but it doesn't actually contain thyroid hormone, according to them. I don't fully understand the science, and they're kind of secretive about it. But what they have found is that in some people, instead of, and this is kind of their hypothesis on how it works, is that instead of attacking the thyroid gland, the antibodies will actually bind to the supplement instead. So I've seen it help a lot of people reduce their thyroid antibodies by taking this supplement. It's called Thyrotropin PMG. It's usually something that you need to buy through a healthcare practitioner, such as an acupuncturist, chiropractor, or a pharmacist or naturopathic doctor. And that's something that you're going to want to work with them to kind of get the right dosage of, because the doses can vary. And some people have had really great results with that and helping it kind of distract the immune system.
Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so tell people how they can get the book and where your website is, please.
So the book is available on Amazon. It's called Hashimoto'S Thyroiditis, Lifestyle Interventions for Finding and Treating the Root Cause. It was the longest title I could think of. So people can get the free chapter, the nutrient depletions and digestion chapter of my book at thyroidpharmacist.com/gift. And this will give them more information about the low stomach acid and thyroid connection, about all the different nutrients that may be depleted with Hashimoto's, and kind of what to do, what kind of supplements they need to take, and what kind of tests they need to do. Because a lot of times, once you get the nutrients figured out, that can really dramatically change how you feel and how you look with hair, helping people lose weight, helping them be less tired. And then I also have some quick starter nutrient-dense foods, and that are gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free. And then I have a guide on how to go gluten-free, because when I first did it, I did all the wrong things. So I was like, okay, so I'm going to go gluten-free. And I started eating gluten-free junk food, which helped a little bit, but it didn't get me as far as if I had known all the things that I put in that little guide for people. So awesome. I hope that information helps.
Cool, yeah, really helpful. Can you say the URL one more time, because I think it cut out a tiny bit?
Sure, it's thyroidpharmacist.com/gift.
/gift. Okay, great. And tell us what you are up to now. I hear you are writing another book.
Yeah, so we're pretty busy right now. I'm working on a second book. It's going to be kind of more of a protocol base, so it's going to have a lot of different recipes and things to really support people on their thyroid journeys. This first book is kind of a DIY book, so if you're somebody that really loves to, I would highly recommend it if you want to be very empowered and learn about everything you need to do to take charge of your own health. The second book is kind of going to have a lot of great recipes and tips that you can implement right away.
A little bit more practical usage type thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Kind of break things down a little. The first one breaks things down, but the second one is going to be kind of like, here are the recipes that you work on for the next 30 days to help you do a lot of the practical things.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Izabella, for your time. I really enjoyed the book. Recommend it highly. It's just super nutrient. I was going to say nutrient dense. It's like a nutrient dense food for your brain, and it's a great book for practitioners too. It's just really adding to the library, and great book. So thanks again, and thanks to all our listeners. Hope you can tune in next week. I hope you can subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on iTunes, and we're always thankful for your reviews and recommendations to friends. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.